Howdy! Welcome back to Cryptic Creatures, the show where I give you the inside scoop on monsters from mythology, folklore, and more. I'm your host, local monster nerd, and the only one on your AM radio, Mothmancha. Just to get it out of the way, if you watched the Yukiona episode, I mentioned that the next episode of the series will be about Quetzalcoatl. Upon really digging into it, I found out that Mesoamerican mythology is a lot broader and a lot more confusing of a topic than I originally understood, and I want to give it the time it deserves to properly research and represent everything. I'm not sure when I'm ready to release that, so I've pushed it to the side, and in the meanwhile, we will finally delve into the wonderful world of the United States of America's monsters, my absolute favorite. So, question. Do you believe in aliens? What the f*** was that? I certainly believe that aliens exist somewhere in this messed up universe of ours, but when it comes to actual alien encounters on Earth, well, I'm a little more skeptical. That doesn't mean I don't love a good alien conspiracy theory, quite the contrary actually. It's really hard trying to be both objective and having a sense of wonder about the world, and I'm trying to find a good middle ground between the two. That being said, the whole culture around aliens and UFOs and the like is of course very different than it was 70 years ago during Project Blue Book, which was the Air Force's deep dive study into UFOs. There's no big question why things are different now. Major changes in mass communication, the internet, have drastically changed the way in which stories become spread and sensationalized. Sometimes I like to sit down and wonder, idolize even, what it might have been like to live in the UFO craze of the 1950s, reading about an alien sighting from several towns over, fascinated about whatever's going on, only able to leave it up to speculation. And then I remembered I'd be living smack dab in the middle of segregation, and I shut the f*** up. Nowadays, though, any schmuck can just AI-generated UFO sighting, or if not a talentless hack, video edit one. Information can be spread across the internet almost instantly and judged by people worldwide. Some YouTubers even make their whole thing debunking fake content. All this to say that, today, an alleged alien sighting doesn't really quite rock the world the same way that it would 70 years ago. Speaking of 70 years ago, we are coming up on the 70th anniversary of one of these sightings very soon now. So let's go back in time and jump into one of the many stories of these sightings. See what everyone was freaking out about in the 50s, and find out what the hell was going on in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. For a while up until researching this video, I had always considered the Hopkinsville Goblin to be more of a cryptid than I think it actually is. If we're being technical here, this case is considered to be an alien sighting, and it's heavily linked with ufology, and although aliens and cryptids are very similar, they are technically two different categories of creature. The main thing is that, especially here in the US, we've just lumped them into the same category, which, you know. Normally at this stage, I would describe the Hopkinsville Goblin and tell you about its abilities, but given the nature of this case, especially since it is mostly a singular isolated incident, we'll get into that, we're going to jump straight into the encounter and then talk about it later. This event took place on the night of August 21st, 1955, out on the farm of Elmer Sutton, located in Kentucky between the towns of Kelly and Hopkinsville. Elmer Sutton, also known as Lucky, was being visited by his friend Billy Ray Taylor, as well as Taylor's wife June. The Taylors were friends of the Suttons because of time they had spent together working in a carnival. That night around 7 p.m., Taylor makes his way outside to head to the well for some water, but when he returns to the farmhouse, it's not only with water, but instead cause for alarm. Apparently, unbelievably, Billy Ray Taylor saw some sort of UFO land in a field behind the house. Reasonably, however, the exact same thing happened that would happen if you went outside and you claimed to see a UFO. Nobody believed him. Even during this whole UFO mania, people understood that hoaxes existed and that a lot of these things could just be something else. But everything changed when a creature appears at the front door of the home. About 3 foot high, silvery and glowing, with big yellow eyes and pointy ears, is some sort of creature. Some sort of Hopkinsville Goblin. A group of these little gray men begin to approach the house, and now that everyone in the farmhouse has seen them, they immediately jump into action. Lucky takes his shotgun and shoots through the window at the creature, which simply disappears. Taylor steps outside to confront the creatures, but he is quickly attacked with some sort of claw coming down from the roof and grabbing him by the hair. The family then rolls initiative into what becomes a 4-hour-long standoff between the family and the mysterious creatures. In D&D terms, by the way, that's about 2,400 rounds of combat. Good God. This 4-hour standoff involved up to reportedly 12 to 15 of these goblins assaulting the house, scratching at windows, floating in the air all ghostly-like, and notably taking no damage. A shotgun blast towards one of these creatures by Sutton seemed to do nothing. The creature simply picked itself back up before slinking back off into the darkness, unfazed. Taylor, wielding a .22 caliber pistol, apparently goes through 4 whole boxes of bullets, which for reference is likely 200 or so bullets. Not knowing much about ammunition costs, I was hoping that this would produce some sort of ridiculous sort of cost that they ended up spending, but in all likelihood, a box of 50 bullets was probably around 50 cents. That adds up to about $6 now, for a total of what would be $24 worth of bullets in 2025. This is such a middling number that it's honestly not funny at all, and it makes this tangent useless. Luckily, that wraps it back around to being funny again. Interestingly enough, $24 can buy you a similar number of the same type of bullets now, which is cool, I guess, if you're into that sort of thing. 200 bullets, though, is enough for one of 2 different conclusions to be drawn. One might just be that Taylor was an absolutely terrible shot. The other, better conclusion to draw is that the goblins are immune to bullets, bouncing off of them harmlessly. At around 11 p.m., after 4 hours of defending their farm against these creatures, let's be honest, the worst they've done is grab a guy's hair at this point, the family seizes their chance to make a break for it, and they rush to their cars and drive to the Hopkinsville police station, very agitated and reporting about the little silver men that they had been locked in a vicious, bloodless battle with. I often find some weird discrepancies in the story here in terms of the number of people who went to the police. A lot of, and I mean a lot of, sources say that there were 5 adults and 7 children who showed up. Other sources, however, say that it was around 8 adults and 3 children, which, based on what I've been researching, seems much more accurate. Lists of the residents of the farm at that time list there to be only 3 children, and many sources state that there were 11 people in the farm, not 12, so I don't know where this other number came from. It's strange when you find sources that say both of these contradictory statements too. As much as I don't use Wikipedia as a source for information, it does allege that 5 adults and 7 children went to the police, but then it lists the inhabitants of the farm further down, and where only 3 children seem to be in the farm at all. Maybe the real goblins are these 4 mysterious children. Regardless of the exact makeup of the party, the Taylors and the Suttons stay at the police station, where officers are sent to review the situation along with some investigators from the nearby army base. They spend about 2 hours combing the property, finding nothing except a broken window and a farm covered in bullet holes. No blood, no corpses, and no goblins. Apparently, as reported in the Kentucky New Era, the only excitement to be found was a military policeman accidentally stepping on a cat's tail. The officers comb the area best they can, and they end up returning to the Suttons and the Taylors empty-handed. Likely relieved that the creatures were gone, everyone returns home to attempt to get some sleep, until around 3:30 in the morning, when the little men suddenly reappear again until morning breaks, though much less has been reported about this half of the attack than the others. The next day, of course, people crowd the Suttons' farm, mostly to dunk on them for thinking that they were aliens, and I mean, yeah. It's easy to just pass this off as some sort of mass hysteria or hoax. Some suggest that it might be a barrel of monkeys that had escaped from a passing circus. Some suggest that there might have been alcohol involved, although officers all seem to agree that that wasn't the case. This event even popularizes the term "little green men" after the story had been telephoned across the country. The Suttons end up moving away about 2 weeks later. You probably would want to too if 2 whole towns ridiculed you for seeing aliens. According to Lucky's daughter Geraldine, Lucky was incredibly resentful about the whole encounter, regretting that he had ever told anyone that it had happened, and he always maintained that the story was true. Given that this is in the middle of the whole flying saucer hysteria, there were other reports of UFOs at the time. In Evansville, Indiana, which is about 90 miles north of Hopkinsville, 2 women alleged to be on a swimming trip in the Ohio River on August 14th, a week before the Goblin incident. Allegedly, Naomi Johnson had been grabbed by some sort of fuzzy little hand in the middle of the river, just after their group had seen some sort of strange object in the sky. An object that, until they heard about the Hopkinsville incident, they had only joked might be a UFO. Once the women hear about what happened the night of the 21st, however, they're confident it was the same weird little men who were responsible for their attack on the river. Now that we've heard the tale of these creatures, we can take some time to go ahead and put a comprehensive portfolio of what they are and what they can do, so let's go ahead and move on to the next section. Based on the account of the incident we have just looked through, we have an idea of what these creatures might be. The Hopkinsville Goblins were somewhere between 3 and 4 feet tall, with arms that were almost long enough to drag on the ground. These arms seemed to have either claws or talons on them. They either had silvery skin or, less commonly reported, were wearing some sort of metallic garb on their bodies. They had long pointed ears and bright yellow eyes that seemed almost empty, glazed over like they weren't really paying attention. Lastly, description-wise, we hear that their legs were much shorter than their arms, even as being described as atrophied or devolved, as if they didn't use them much. I end with that part of the description because it lends itself directly into the fact that these creatures seem to have little need for legs at all, as they could levitate. They aren't seen doing any crazy aerial maneuvers or the like, but they were airborne and sometimes they would maybe do a small flip in the air. Additionally, and more interestingly, they also seem to be immune to bullets, as the defenders of the farmhouse seem to hear bullets bounce off of their bodies and onto other areas of the farm. One knocked down from a shotgun blast, if you remember, got straight back up, seemingly unaffected. Otherwise they seem, at least to me, kind of unremarkable, albeit a little creepy. I still think it's interesting that this was the story that popularized the concept of the little green men alien trope, given that they very explicitly were not green, but gray. Perhaps somewhere someone just misheard them? There's no real explanation for how this fact was misrepresented. I did see one source claim that the goblins were gray-skinned with some green hues, but I haven't seen that description anywhere else. Many people have tried to figure out what exactly went down on the Sutton's farm that night, some earnestly believing that there were aliens and some taking a more skeptical approach. As I said before, I'm always somewhere in the middle with these. I love these stories and I would love to find out that they are real, but as someone who has actually never experienced any paranormal type activity, there's a big, loud, skeptical guy in the back of my brain yelling at me. As usual, I want to examine where the story came from and how it might have come to be if it were not true. Now, like with the Mongolian deathworm and many other cryptid stories, there is a theoretically simple explanation for what exactly went on here: the Great Horned Owl. If we take a look at the Great Horned Owl, we can see almost every trait I just outlined in the description here in this creature. They had long pointed ears and bright yellow eyes with arms that were almost long enough to drag on the ground. Lastly, description-wise, we hear that their legs were much shorter than their arms. Nowadays, skeptics absolutely believe that these were the culprit, with perhaps the most damning piece of evidence being that, apparently, a family of great horned owls was known to live in the area near the Sutton's farm. Additionally, there was a minor meteor shower reported to be visible in Kentucky that night, which could explain the flying saucer sighting. A common point of contention, though, is what would cause the Suttons and Taylors to believe that an owl was an alien? Obviously, the go-to answer here might be inebriation, but as I already mentioned, there seemed to be a consensus that there was no alcohol on the farm at all, and they were completely sober. Hell, Lucky's wife Glennie apparently wouldn't allow alcohol near the house at all because she was extremely religious. Also, with 11 people on the farm, some children, they couldn't all be that drunk. If there was alcohol involved, I'm confident it would be a known factor in this case. So as we understand it now, this is not a case of drunken hysteria. Another major factor we need to take in account in this case is the victims themselves. I don't mean the actions of Lucky or Taylor, though. I mean the public's perception of them and their families. To the average viewer, this is a low-status backwoods family of hillbillies, specifically stereotyped as not knowing much about anything. Because they were farmers and ex-carnies who lived out in the middle of nowhere, They had to be some drunks who were scared by some owls. The thought that this was a hoax was on almost nobody's mind, because how could some hillbilly farmers conjure up that believable of a tale? I want to be clear that I'm not agreeing with these arguments, but it does affect the public's perception of the entire event significantly, which is what helped draw so much attention to it. Yeah, let's all laugh at this family who, aliens or not, had presumably a terrifying night with children in the house that they're worried about protecting. This also was not a family well known for making wild accusations, and from Geraldine Sutton Stiff's account that I previously mentioned, Lucky was adamant to the end that this actually happened. Ultimately, we don't know and can only speculate, though we should take all of the facts into account instead of drawing conclusions based on stereotypes. Hellier is a documentary series made by a group of paranormal investigators about a continuation of the Hopkinsville Goblin incident, or as they refer to the creature as, the Kentucky Goblin. I don't think I can just avoid talking about Hellier when going into a video about the Hopkinsville Goblins. It's really an anomaly of a series to me, and many other people in fact, because it's hard to tell whether it's a legitimate documentary or some sort of Blair Witch style parody show. The creators of the show are adamant that it is in earnest, so I will take it as such, however. Now, I need to be honest, I did only watch the first season of the show, so there's a lot more to dig through in theory with the second season and apparently upcoming third season. It is an interesting watch, so I'm going to try to give a really brief summary of it and how it connects to this case. Hellier is about a group of paranormal investigators who get caught up in a bunch of coincidences surrounding the Kentucky Goblins case from 1955, leading them to go to Kentucky themselves to investigate. A man named Dr. David Christie writes the team to share his story about how, supposedly, aliens were assaulting his house nightly, scaring and terrorizing him and his family. He even sends photo evidence of strange three-toed footprints. Obviously, this account sounds exactly like the story of the Hopkinsville Goblins from 50, 60 years ago. This at least gets the team interested. They talk a lot about synchronicities that have to do with the Hopkinsville Goblins case and how it kind of brought them all together. There also seems to be a man named Terry Wrist involved, as some sort of mysterious person who seems to have connected Dr. Christie with the investigators. Yes, they do lampshade the fact that his name sounds like terrorist. Episode 1 explains basically all of this, and the team decides to go visit Hellier, Kentucky to investigate, as Dr. Christie is coming from Hellier. Episode 2 delves into the team looking into who Terry Wrist is. They link some writings to the Mothman prophecies somehow, and they first get to Hellier. They spend a lot of time trying to find out which house was Dr. Christie's. He's a long time gone from this area at this point, and the email is 5 years old when they go to investigate it, so they have no more correspondence with the man. They also try to find someone to take them into the hills to look for paranormal activity. Episode 3 leads off with the team performing some occult rituals to, I'm not entirely sure to be honest. Try and communicate with something in the woods, I think. I think it's supposed to be the Hopkinsville Goblin, but I'm still confused why they're using ghost hunting techniques to try and contact this creature, which they believe is still in the area. I don't really fully understand the link between the ghost hunting techniques and the cryptid techniques, which I would think would be completely different. Those seem to be two completely different types of paranormal phenomena, so I'm not entirely sure why they're using ghost hunting techniques, beyond the fact that they are previously ghost hunters and it's what they're familiar with. Regardless, they do get some sort of results. They get this radio that they have cycling through a bunch of channels really quickly, and one of the reachers puts on blackout headphones and a mask so he gets no outside stimuli. He repeats fragments of words that he's able to catch from the shuffling channels while the other members have a conversation with this entity in the woods. It's very interesting, though a little difficult to take seriously, because it reminds me a lot of those Grifter TV psychics who are able to feed you information that makes you hear what you want to hear. I think that they're hearing what they want to hear, not maybe actually what would be going on. One notable part, though, that bugged me was when they're asking what the real name of Terry Wrist is. The response that they get is holler in cold, which seemingly means nothing to them and they don't respond to it. But in episode 2, they spend a bunch of time talking about the Mothman prophecies and Indrid Cold, a figure/pseudo-cryptid involved with the Mothman case, and they draw no connection there whatsoever. But several minutes later, they literally ask the entity if it was Indrid Cold, so I'm not sure if they drew that conclusion off camera or they didn't draw it and they accidentally stumbled into it, and it really bothered me that they didn't talk about that response potentially being an Indrid Cold thing, because if I were in this situation and I were trying to actually glean information from this, I would absolutely come to the conclusion that it was Indrid Cold. Anyways, the team also learns that the man who sent them out here, Dr. David Christie, never seemed to exist anywhere. There was no record of him in the town. They, however, do hear a bunch of stories that do seem to corroborate with the existence of the Kentucky Goblin, which leads to a ton of continued coincidences. Episode 4 takes us through some further coincidences until the group realizes that they can trace the IP address of the original email by David Christie, and they learn that the IP address comes from Canada, not anywhere near Hellier, Kentucky, which discourages them pretty heavily, until they convince themselves that Christie could have been using a VPN, and they really muddy the entire premise of this part of the investigation as they get really riled up by the did he, didn't he of it all. Whether Christie was f***ing with them or not, however, they've gotten to the understanding that regardless of what actually happened, something is going on in Hellier and they were called here for a reason. So, like any reasonable person, they just go out into this cave and they see a tin can. Now, earlier, during the channel surfing ritual, they had mentioned the idea of a tin can. Specifically, the investigator doing the ritual had a very vivid image of a tin can appear in his head. This freaks them all out. Who put the tin can there? Was it a good can or a bad can? Was the can evil?
Does the hippo see them? Is the poor mute Cebu successful in communicating the imminent danger to the other passengers?
It's honestly kind of funny seeing all of them freak out about what is a tin can on the ground. Finally, episode 5. The team starts by performing another one of these sensory deprivation rituals to get some visions, and they get some kind of middling results. They ultimately come to the conclusion that there is nothing else for them to find at the moment, and they feel some force compelling them to leave and be done with the investigation for now, which they end up wrapping up. They find no goblins in the caves, although they are pretty sure that something is going on, coming to the conclusion that the tin can in the mines could have been Indrid Cold. It is kind of fun seeing them tie all of these occurrences together into one final product. And ultimately, I think this is a sort of weird diversion into the episode. I can't not include it because it directly involves the Hopkinsville Goblin case and some potential resurgences of it in the modern day, but it also really adds nothing to the story beyond rumors of another incident, at least in Season 1. I have not watched the second season. I do think it's a fun watch, especially if you do like ghost hunting content, but I can't help but be a little disappointed that the bit of it that I watched doesn't really help me fill out our portfolio of content on the Goblin here. Finally, as usual, let's talk about some notable appearances of the Goblin in the media that we love to consume, starting with my favorite. Likely the most well-known reference to the Hopkinsville Goblin, believe it or not, is actually from Pokemon, and you might not even be familiar with it. Sableye, released all the way back in Generation 3 in Ruby and Sapphire, is very obviously visually inspired by the accounts of the Hopkinsville Goblin, even down to the way that it moves. It being a ghost and dark type could potentially have something to do with the supernatural resistance the goblins had to bullets, because at the time that Sableye was designed, it was the only Pokemon to have no weaknesses whatsoever. This has changed in recent games due to the inclusion of the fairy type, but it is an interesting further connection between the two when Sableye was designed. That is where the resemblance ends. The rest of Sableye's design, largely its obsession with gems, seems to come from some other sources. An inclusion that surprised me here, though, is that of E.T. the extraterrestrial. I never would have drawn this conclusion to the Hopkinsville Goblin being related to E.T., and I don't think most other people would have either. The story here is that Steven Spielberg had wanted to write a sequel to Close Encounters of the Third Kind. The script that was produced to be the sequel was called The Night Skies, which was inspired by Spielberg's talks with the astronomer J. Allen Hynek about the Hopkinsville Goblins case. Night Skies would have been about a family besieged by aliens with different personalities, and eventually it got discarded and turned into several of Spielberg's upcoming movies. First of all, E.T. If we look at ET's design itself, we can even see some of the traits of the goblin represented here in its long arms and undeveloped legs. Night Skies also ended up inspiring parts of Gremlins and Poltergeist as well, which are both movies Spielberg is involved in. Both are movies that you can see attacks from some sort of supernatural force. No direct adaptations of the Goblin here at all, but it is some really cool inspiration, and I appreciate that. If you've watched every episode of this series so far, you know I always talk about how these creatures appear in D&D and Pathfinder, and I bet you might expect me to regretfully inform you that there is no Pathfinder version of the Hopkinsville Goblin, because there certainly isn't a D&D one. Not an official one anyways. However, you're gonna be damn wrong. That's right, we're 6 for 6 on monsters here compared to D&D's 2 or 3. The wonderful team at Paizo in the first edition's Bestiary 5 gave us the Hopkins Gremlin, which, once again, is undeniably our beloved alien critter. Making it a gremlin instead of a goblin is a design choice mostly, since goblins in this system are your standard green little freaks, whereas gremlins are a catch-all group of small mischievous fae. The Hopkins Gremlin is very weak, but their main strength lies in the ability to dodge 75% of ranged attacks and redirect them towards other targets. They use this ability largely to goad victims into breaking their own belongings after scaring them. Sound familiar? I think this is an absolutely wonderful adaptation of the creature into a stat block, and it's also an encounter I desperately want to run with my table someday. The horror anthology film Cryptids from 2023 features a segment about the Hopkinsville Goblin. In the frame story, we have a radio host, Major Harlan Dean, receiving calls from listeners about cryptid sightings that they've encountered or heard from others. There are segments about the Melonheads, Chupacabra, and more, which I might cover in later installments of this series, but today we're here for the segment on the Hopkinsville Goblin. This movie was weird. It very much is a goofy B-horror mess, and it is aware of that. This segment really encapsulates that well. The segment takes place on Halloween, revolving about a guy visiting his dad for the holiday. The dad is definitely a UFO guy. He had had some sort of alien encounter years ago as a kid. He finds an alien egg in the lake and, like any reasonable person, takes it home. The egg, of course, hatches, and a number of these really goofy-looking rubbery aliens start tormenting the man at his house. I do love their design, I will give them that, but that's really all that happens in the segment. It's super short, the goblins are barely on screen, and the rest is kind of poorly acted. The female lead is also just completely useless to the story and is only there to be some sort of eye candy, so it's just really weird. It's not great, and the full movie isn't great either, though I love the goblin design, and I'm glad that they got some sort of recognition here. Most excitingly, perhaps, is, wait for it, GoblinCon. You heard that right. This year in Hopkinsville, Kentucky itself will be GoblinCon. October 17th and 18th this year, 2025. Motherfucking GoblinCon. Honestly, it sounds awesome. As much as I've painted myself as more of a skeptic this episode, I'm really trying to play both sides because I love this stuff. This isn't sponsored, by the way. I found it on my own independently, and it just sounds awesome. With panels on multiple different cryptids, a talk from Geraldine Sutton-Stith herself, and more? Apparently, you can go get tickets on their website now. I don't know if I'll be able to make it, but if one of you is interested, it sounds sick. An entire cryptid convention based around the goblins. I'll go ahead and have a link to their site down in the description. I think normally the section would be a lot longer, but the Hopkinsville Goblin, like a lot of non-mainstream cryptids, doesn't show up in a lot of media that isn't very specifically about cryptids. I'd honestly love to see more of them. They're very cool creatures with a neat couple of abilities, and I'd love to see more takes on them. I want to make it absolutely clear that I love cryptids, and there's always something about these stories that sparks my imagination in a way that few things do. A story of aliens that has been remembered more as a cryptid tale is something I love even more. Whether there were or weren't aliens on the Sutton's farm that night, one thing is for certain. The Hopkinsville Goblin is real in the minds of believers and fans worldwide. Just like Santa Claus, if we believe it, we kind of make it real in a weird sort of way. I, for one, believe in the Hopkinsville Goblin. And he believes in you too. Thanks for watching this episode. I'm hard at work on more videos for this channel, and I'm super excited for what I have in store. I'm not exactly sure what video is going to be next, but you should expect another turning monsters into fake monsoon, as well as another magic video based around the rock, among the next episode of this series and other things. If you enjoyed this, please throw me a like and a subscribe. It helps me so much. If there's any monsters you want me to research and cover, let me know in the comments. Do you believe in the Hopkinsville Goblin? If a 3-foot freak attacked you at your doorstep, how would you defeat him? Write a 2 to 5 sentence discussion post and then respond to 2 others. Until next time, I'm Mothmancha, and remember, she goblin on my Kelly till I Hopkinsville. She Hopkins on my Ville till I be goblin? Kelly be goblin on my Hopkins till I... She Hopkins on my goblin till I... She